We're going to start off with a stiffener design. You can see here I switched to board planning mode. As I mentioned earlier, the board planning is divided by regions now, or defined by regions. So you see the individual regions here defined. You can have overlap between the regions, and that is determined by priority, which you can see right here. We'll go into a little bit more detail there in a little bit. One nice thing that has been added is because of these independent regions, you can now utilize snapping. You can see right here that in order to get the two edges to meet up, you see the little snapping icon right there, that little circle. So if I want to make it flush, it's really easy to make it flush. Um, so let's go into a little bit more detail in the layer stack manager. I can press DK and open that up. We see here R2 with we named it R2 plus stiffener. If you click this new add functionality, you can see I can add the stiffener or adhesive. So here I'm going to add a stiffener, and you can see that it is added into the layer stack right there. In addition, you can see if you haven't worked too much with this new layer stack document type that was introduced a couple of releases ago, you see that in the properties panel, you can do stuff like define whether the area is a flex area or not. Coming back here, we now have this new layer stack associated here, R2 plus stiffener. If I want to change the color of any region, I simply click here, and it gives me a better visibility of the board overall. I mentioned that if you have a realistic stack up, it's a little bit easier to convey design intent. So here we have a draftsman document of this PCB documents. You could see here all of the different layer stacks available for us, and it'd be really easy for someone to be able to read this and understand the differences between the different layer stacks. Moving on to another design here, we have been talking about the overlapping regions and how that is defined by priority. So if I click here, you see that there are many regions. I'm going to select region F5, which is encompassed by this area here and this little curve. And you can see that I have associated layer stack F5. It has priority 0. We can see over here some more priorities. And the way that this is defined, if a higher priority means that it will take precedent over the other ones. If they are at the same priority level, the stack up with the most number of layers will win out. So coming through here, we have the bend lines. As we talked about, these are now persistent. So if you make any edits to the board shape, you are still able to see these bend lines. They will stay there, and then you can move them over, associate them to the required area. Here in the properties panel, you can define which stack regions are utilizing this bending line. So we see here, we just have F7. For another one over here, we would have F6, and so on. The different regions are really easy to identify in that manner. If we switch over to 2D, we see the whole design with these connectors. We come over to 3D, and as I move this over here, I can hit 5, and it will show us the fully flexed board. We see here there are the overlapping regions and the bend lines as they are defined by region type. Even though these are overlapping, we were very easily able to associate the bend line to the different layers and have this split. One more design we have here. We have this region defined within another region. So this whole, the big region is R1. And you can see here the layer stack is rigid, priority 0. And then when we click again, we can select F3. And we see that this is actually a flexible layer stack. Because it has priority 5, that will have a higher priority than the original rigid layers, which are priority 0. We see the same thing in areas like over here. We can see the different regions. And what's nice is being able to see the different definitions really quickly defined, and I can change these individual shapes if I need to, right? Let's say I need to make this longer or shorter, and it's not going to destroy these bending lines. That's one of the things that was really difficult to deal with before. When you were defining rigid flex designs, the bending lines would disappear when you change the shape. So that's no longer an issue. If we switch over to a 3D view, and once again, press 5 to flex the design. We'll zoom out a little bit, and you see here the area that is overlapped is flex, and we have the cutout here that perfectly cuts out the remaining area of the zone. So we defined a square here within the big rectangle, and then the cutouts to just define that specific area. So I'll flex it once again, and we see over here we have certain materials that split up based on the stacks we've defined, and you can see in certain areas the defined rigid and the flexible area. So if I actually flatten this out again, you see this rigid and then this flat area. When I flatten it out, you're actually able to tell in the layer stack, you have the rigid area, and then you have the flexible area. So by working with the priorities in the properties panel, you're able to define shapes that would have been incredibly difficult to define in the past, and very easily define them and work with the different types of layer stacks. We also looked at adding the adhesives in the layer stack manager. So let's go back to the slides.